Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to discuss the important differences between ignore defense and all defense down, and why you need both stats if you want to succeed in Marvel Future Fight. Now, a quick little history lesson for all you old heads out there, all you veteran Marvel Future Fight players. Ignore defense actually used to be called, like 2 or 3 years ago, it was called defense penetration. But it was changed. I think it was changed to make more sense and to flow more with ignore dodge. But just to be clear, ignore dodge has nothing to do with ignore defense. Your character may or may not need ignore dodge, depending on the content and depending on the PvP opponent. But every character, 100% of the time, needs a very high ignore defense. When I say very high, I say like at least 40%. So looking at any of your characters at any given time, if you go to the hero details page and the ignore defense is lower than 40%, you are losing a lot of damage. So if you it doesn't matter if you have a tier 3 character, it doesn't matter if the character has all defense down, it doesn't matter if they have a CTP of rage, you need to have at least 40% ignore defense or more. 50% is actually the max, and that's what you want to aim for. All defense, on the other hand, is also a really important stat, but it's not a stat that you can control. It's a stat that either exists on a skill or doesn't exist on a skill. So we are going to discuss today the differences between ignore defense and all defense down, where you can get more of these and where they are most important, because both abilities, while they are similar, they are also mutually exclusive in the sense that you don't necessarily need all defense down for certain game modes, but you do need it for other game modes, and then ignore defense is going to have a much higher impact in certain game modes compared to other game modes. So they don't necessarily have the same effect across all of the content of Marvel Future Fight. So starting off with the easier one of the two, ignore defense. Ignore defense is a core stat like skill cooldown, and the main way that you get it is from your comic cards. All characters will have a small amount of ignore defense on their gears. Possibly, it's not a guarantee, but it's possible that on their gears 1 through 4, they can have it on one of the orange stats there that I'm listing. So Magneto in this case has ignore defense on his 4th gear, Magneto's helmet. Captain America, on the other hand, has ignore defense on Vibranium Shield. And then you can go and you can find characters that don't have any ignore defense. She has ignore defense on her 1st stat of Dark Star Shield. But there are some characters that don't have any ignore defense. He has it there on Arc Reactor. But anyways, there are some characters that don't have any ignore defense on any of their gears. So if you don't have any ignore defense on your 4 gears, what else can you do? Well, you can put ignore defense on your Uru. That's always a possibility. You can put ignore defense as your 4th gear option here, as one of the ones that you can select. You can also give your character more ignore defense via Power of Angry Hulk, Overdrive, and I believe a couple of other sets also have ignore defense. I believe, what's it called? Drastic Density Enhancement. Okay, Spy Tactics also has ignore defense, and I believe so does Drastic Density Enhancement. But you don't necessarily want to sacrifice your ISO 8 set just to get ignore defense. So you still want to stick with either Power of Angry Hulk or Overdrive, and that's part of the reason why they're such good sets, because they include ignore defense, and ignore defense is a very high priority stat. When you're a brand new player, when you're very, very new to the game and you can't get enough ignore defense on your cards, you can consider rolling obelisks with ignore defense, but I don't recommend it long term, because having to roll 200 plus obelisks for characters to give them ignore defense is a really inefficient way of doing things. So rather than doing that, you can see there, that's an ignore defense obelisk. Rather than doing that, you should prioritize getting 20 to 30% ignore defense on your cards ASAP. The final place that you can get ignore defense other than team ups, you can get ignore defense from certain team ups, although it's not consistent and you shouldn't rely on it, is from a character's uniform. If a character doesn't have a uniform, you're shit out of luck. But if they do have a uniform, the 3rd option, and only the 3rd option, can roll ignore defense. So those are all of the ways that you can get ignore defense. Why is ignore defense so important? Well, it ignores the defense. That's basically the best way that I can explain it to you, because I don't have a more in-depth, I don't have a more logical or mathematical explanation for what ignore defense is. But if you take a character with 25% ignore defense and you test them out in content, in World Boss, or in PvP, you'll see how much damage they're doing. And then if you give them 50% ignore defense, you will see that they do way more damage. Ignore defense is just as important for PvE content as it is for PvP content. One example I can give you guys is that a few months back, I made a PvP video about Sentinel, back when you could reduce the damage to 1 from certain characters. So I was using Sentinel in addition to, I believe, Hela and Colossus. I was using the Hela Colossus combo in Timeline Battle, and my Sentinel was taking 1 damage from Jean Grey. That was hilarious and it was fun, but I actually couldn't kill Jean Grey because my ignore defense was too low. You can see it's down to 43%. I think at the time I had it down about 40%, and I actually had to raise it up to about 45 or 46% before I was actually able to kill enemy Jean Greys. So even a small percentage, like 6% ignore defense, can be the difference between killing someone in PvP and not. So ignore defense is really, really important for all content, but you will notice just as much of an impact in PvP as you will in PvE. Finally, I just mentioned one more thing. Some characters, very, very few characters, I think off the top of my head, Thanos' uniform, Apocalypse's uniform, Captain America's skill, and Iron Fist's skill. Very, very few characters in the game, and I think also Sharon Rogers, have ignore defense on a skill or on a passive or on their uniform effect. So in Captain America's case, he's got 10%. He's got a self buff. He gives himself 10% ignore defense for 10 seconds. So technically, you don't have to give Captain America 40 or 50% ignore defense. You can see I'm at 40% specifically for Captain America because he can buff himself up to 50% every time. Iron Fist is something similar, but that's ignore defense. It's really important, and you should try to get, like I said, 20 to 30% ignore defense on your cards ASAP. I have 30% ignore defense on my cards. I actually wish it was a little bit higher. I wish it was like 33 or 35%. I really think 35% is the sweet spot. You do not get any ignore defense from your alliance bonus, so that is why you need to get it from somewhere else, and that's why you need so much on your cards compared to skill cooldown. Now, on the flip side, what is all defense down? All defense down is a skill effect. It's not a stat that you can get. It's not something you can get from cards. It's not something you can get from a team up bonus. It's not something you can get from a uniform bonus or a passive. I guess there's Sabretooth's passive, but anyways, 99.9% of the time, all defense down is going to come from a skill effect. So a skill effect would be underneath the skill. It will say decrease of all defense, and then it will give you a percentage. And then if the defense stacks, it will give you another percentage. It will say stacks up to. So it gives you not only the percentage that it stacks per hit, so that's minus 10% for each hit of the skill, and then it stacks up to minus 50%. So the skill might not have 5 hits, but it can go up to minus 50. And then it may or may not have ignore immunity. Ignore immunity, as we know, allows you to apply the all defense down to world bosses. So that's only for world boss. And then it will give you a timer on it. So 10 seconds. That's how long it lasts, unless it gets cleansed or unless it gets removed by some sort of debuff removal. So that's all defense down. Another version of all defense down you can see here from Magneto. It just has a number, minus 18% for 5 seconds. So there's no stacking. There's no ignores immunity. So this will not work on world boss, but it will work on Alliance Battle Extreme. It will work in other content, but it's just a flat 18%. It doesn't go higher. It's just the very first hit automatically applies 18%. If it can apply 18%, and then that's it. That's the whole skill. It's just like a one and done kind of thing. It's an all or nothing kind of thing. Very similar to Rocket Raccoon's 4th skill. It's got minus 40% all defense for 3 seconds. It just gives you the amount and it gives you the time. Now, is all defense important? Yes, all defense down is incredibly important for PvE content, because PvE content in this game, world boss, alliance battle, things like that, scales. So there's scaling going on. So when you go to stage 1 of world boss, there's very low scaling. So maybe the boss has like 0% added attack, 0% added defense. Same thing goes for Shadowland. But as you guys saw, when you get up to stage 90 or 100 of Shadowland, the scaling is crazy. It's like plus 6,000 HP, plus 5,000 defense. So that plus 5,000 defense, it can take a regular defense stat, like let's say they've got a regular defense stat of 10,000 energy and 10,000 physical. You take that 10,000 and you multiply it by the 5,000 bonus, right? And now suddenly you've got a character with 500,000 defense. I don't know if I did the math right, but you understand what I'm saying. They've got 500,000 defense, or they got 5 million defense. That's crazy. That's way too high, and that's why your damage is so much lower. And so that's why you need all defense down to reduce the defense of the enemy in those kinds of content. It's really just something that you learn from playing, and you learn from sort of RPGs. In order to make the difficulty seem harder, they have to do basically 3 things. So they can raise the enemy's attack, they can raise the enemy's defense, or they can raise the enemy's HP. In Marvel Future Fight, they do all 3. So when you go to a higher stage of World Boss, when I play with the slider on the World Boss difficulty, what I'm essentially doing is I'm lowering Cull Obsidian's attack, defense, and health. Right? Here, he's going to have, let's say, 80 million HP. And let's say he's got 1 million defense. But then when I go up to 70, he's going to have 90 million HP. And he's going to have 2 million defenses. I'm not saying it's exactly what it is. I'm not saying those numbers are accurate, because I have no idea, but that's basically how it works. So all defense down is very important for PvE content, and it's more important the higher you go. And that's what makes characters like Deadpool, Doctor Strange, and others that can apply a large amount of all defense down. That's what makes them so strong for this kind of content. Characters like Sabretooth. The reason why those characters are not strong for Galactus World Boss and not as strong for Master Mold is because you can't apply that all defense down to them, but it's separate from Ignore Defense. Ignore Defense doesn't worry about immunity or Ignore Immunity. Ignore Defense just applies... Sorry, I hit the mic. Ignore Defense just applies across the whole game, whereas all defense down can only apply if you can stack a debuff. So that is, for that reason, all defense down is useless for PvP. It's not like 100% useless, but it's basically useless for PvP, because 99% of PvP teams will run a debuff leadership like Silver Surfers or Jean Greys, or they will run Wasp, which gives them the debuff which will destroy or cleanse or basically just erase the all defense down that you try to apply. So applying all defense down in PvP is going to be next to impossible against most teams. And then the other problem with all defense down for PvP is that in PvP, enemies don't have very high defenses. Even if I did something like this, even if I used Thanos' leadership, and then I used, let's say, Blue Marvel. Okay, I'm just going to give you guys the most exaggerated example possible. Even if I try to stack Thanos' defenses as high as I possibly can, because Blue Marvel gives 50% all defense, Thanos' defense is only going to be 32,000. 32,000 defense is nothing in Marvel Future Fight. That's not really something that I can explain with words and calculations, but you can just test it out yourself. Thanos is not going to be invincible with this team up. He's still going to take tons of damage, partially because Ignore Defense is going to ignore 50% of that. So that's another reason why all defense down really doesn't work in PvP, because Ignore Defense is already doing so much that you don't need all defense down. Also because we just can't get our defenses that high. You can see there my HP is still more than double my defenses. Defense in Marvel Future Fight just doesn't really mean much for PvP. That's why we have damage reduction. Damage reduction is much more effective than defense ever will be, because it reduces the damage after it's calculated by a flat... Well, I don't know if it's after it's calculated, but it reduces the damage by a flat amount rather than being defenses that can be so easily penetrated, or in Ignore Defense's case, just straight up ignored. So the summary of what I just said is pretty straightforward. You need Ignore Defense. You need close to 50% on every single character, and you want to get all defense down, and you want to pay attention to which characters have all defense down on their skills, and then of course use all defense down strikers, and I made a video for that. You know, Scarlet Witch, Weapon Hex, Negasonic Teenage Warhead. You use those characters because they apply all defense down, so that you can use them with characters even if those characters don't have all defense down. But remember, you don't need all defense down for PvP. You do need Ignore Defense for PvP, and then you need them both for PvE content like World Boss, Shadowland, ABX, stuff like that. So hopefully this explanation of the differences between Ignore Defense and all defense down has been helpful. If you still have questions or you're confused as well, hit me up in the comments down below. Hit me up on Discord. I can help you out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Welcome to 2020 once again, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.